Hello, everyone, and welcome to our new content series, Exploring the Shadows with Keila and Connie. We are so excited to deep dive into the world of shadow work. It's a practice that's gained so much momentum recently and has proven to be a very transformative journey for so many people. So we want to dive into shadow work together and light the way for all of you who are curious about the topic and who are serious about learning shadow work and how to incorporate it into your life. I'm Keila Shaheen. I'm the creator of the Shadow Work Journal. Joining me in this series is Connie. She's a renowned expert in the field of shadow work and a retired Jungian therapist. Together, we're going to guide you through understanding your shadow throughout different avenues in life, be it in your relationships, amongst friendships, during life changes and challenges and transitions in the workplace, and so much more. But for today, I wanted to start off by setting the scene for this series and just covering the basics of shadow work, because there's a lot of common questions and misconceptions about this practice. And it's important for us to cover that foundation of shadow work before diving into the depths of it in different aspects of our lives. This discussion is really just that. We're gonna have a casual conversation and explore shadow work with Connie, and I'm using my curiosity to be my compass and take us into different questions. And we're also tapping into our community's questions. So if you are curious about a certain topic in the realm of shadow work, give us a comment and leave a question and we'll try to answer it. I just want to thank you, Connie, for being open to sharing this space with me and being the light that is guiding the path throughout all of our questions and curiosity. And I would love for you to give everyone a quick intro and let them get to know you.
Thank you, Kayla. I'm so excited to be here with you and to just pass on this knowledge that is about 100 years old, really, from the early days of psychology with Freud and Jung, who both were just intrepid explorers of the unconscious before anyone else even understood that it existed in us. And Jung, who was a student from Freud and then broke off from him, coined the name shadow to refer to the personal unconscious, that part of us that's like a blind spot. It's hidden. We can't look, we can't see it, we can't glance at it directly because its nature is to hide. And so, why does that happen? How does that help us? And how does that sabotage us or hinder us? And these are the kinds of questions that people have about the shadow. So, when we're really little children and we're dependent on the adults around us, we're like little sponges and we pick up messages from parents and teachers and clergy people. Some of the messages are positive. That's good. Do more of that or be more that way. And some of the glances or comments or body language that we pick up is negative, telling us, not okay. Don't be angry, be nice. Or don't say that, be polite. Or don't touch yourself, that's not okay. And so, whatever the message is about that's forbidden or that's taboo or that's shameful, those feelings and beliefs and behaviors get repressed, which is a psychology word for buried into the shadow, into the unconscious. And so instead of being a part of our conscious personality or our ego, it gets buried into the shadow. And so the ego and the shadow develop in tandem, like hand by hand, as we're growing up.
Do you think
And
that the ego is what holds space for the shadow? Do you think that the ego speaks through the unconscious in that way, through our shadows in some way?
I think that initially they develop in opposition to each other, but in a bigger container, they're holding each other in place. So
Mhm.
that's really insightful of you. But they look like, because most of us look at it from the point of view of our ego, they look like they're really separate. And that's why people have this popular misconception that what goes into the shadow is bad, but it's only bad in relation to the ego because of this dynamic that they're in. If crying was shamed in your family and a boy was told, you're a sissy if you cry, or a girl is told, you're disappointing me if you cry, then we learn that our sadness is not okay and that it might result in punishment or criticism or even abandonment. And so unconsciously in the shadow, we begin to hold back those tears, that sadness, that sorrow with fear. We're afraid to express it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so our ego, our conscious personality, learns not to show that full range of feeling
Mm-hmm.
about sadness and grief, disappointment, sorrow. It gets lost in the shadow. But you could also look at our talent. Anything can be buried in the shadow, right?
Yes.
So in my house, academic achievement was really emphasized and rewarded. But if I had musical talent or artistic talent, that would have been devalued. And so it would have been buried in the shadow. All our gifts can be in the shadow too.
Yes, I love to explore that in a different video session. Exploring your gifts, your talents, your creative abilities. Yeah, that's a great example of the seemingly negative aspects of your shadows and also the more positive aspects of your unconscious that can be part of your conscious personality that can uplift and empower you throughout life. I'd love to know from you and for everyone watching, what does it look like to start to bring your shadows into conscious awareness in life? Like, what does this look like?
I began this inner work about 40 years ago. My first book, Meeting the Shadow, came out in 1990, and Romancing the Shadow came out in 1995, which is really about shadow work in relationships. I remember I think it was New Year's, I was hanging out with friends, and I was thinking about my friends as mirrors for my shadow because we began to use that language and kind of offer each other feedback and reflections. And I gathered my friends and I said to them, how did you experience me this year? Do you have any feedback for me? And every single one of them said, you're too judgmental. And so I realized my first shadow character that I wanted to work on, I called it the judge. The way that I work with shadow work, which is a little bit different from you, from the Shadow Work Journal, I form these shadow parts into a character so that it's easier to make a conscious relationship with it. When I named it the judge, I saw an image in my mind's eye of a man in a black robe wagging his finger at me. He was the judge. And what was I saying to myself when I was judgmental? And I began to hear the same repeating comments as I used my self-observation through the day. And I began to detect how and when I was judging people. And then I noticed the feelings that came up with that inner dialogue. And I noticed what happened to my body when I was caught in the judge and being judgmental. And then I began to trace back this shadow character of the judge to its origins in my family. How did the judge form? Why did it form? How did it serve my development as a child to be judgmental of others? In this case, I recognized that the judge made me feel superior to other people, and that was a defense, right? Because I'm older now, so I'm looking back at it. As a child, I don't know that. But that it was a defense and that protected me from feeling inferior.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this comparison going on in the shadow. Who was better? Remember in high school how you always comparing yourself to your peers, and maybe even in college, middle school and in college. So that comparison was going on, and this judge had formed in my shadow, and it was protecting me from feeling inferior. But the deeper consequence was I felt separate from people. I couldn't feel the deep connection because I was judging them. So I spent a number of years doing shadow work on the judge, using my self-observation to listen to the inner dialogue, see how it made me feel, when I was doing that, why I was doing that, and how I could stop doing that if I chose to. So for me, when we make a conscious relationship with some shadow content that was previously unconscious, we have more choice. We're not controlled by it anymore. Because in the unconscious, it's carrying a lot of charge. If you think about addiction, someone is controlled in the moment by the addict shadow. But once you form a conscious relationship with that shadow, you begin to have more choice. Even if it's just a moment, oh, here's the addict. Do I want to act on it today or not?
Yeah.
Here's the judge. Do I want to feel that way or not?
Mm-hmm.
And you come back to your center. I always teach meditation with shadow work. So you take a breath, you come back to your center, you recognize that's not who I am, right? I'm not really the judge. That's a shadow. It's not who I am in my deepest spiritual nature, my true nature. So you begin to break your identification with it, come back to your center, and then make a choice. I'm not going to judge that person today.
Yeah. Thank you for painting that picture. That's very clear. We often let those shadow characters, if we're unconscious of them, right? We often act out in them and it doesn't feel like it's a choice. And so this process, this method allows you to take agency and choose, it empowers you to choose. Do I want to continue this route? Do I want to play this part that is acting out within me? Or do I want to take a step back and pivot and come back to the center and choose a different direction? Our unconscious is choosing for us when we start to act out. And so that allows us to take the control, the power back and change the way we approach, different situations or friendships in life. And
that's one of the big promises of shadow work, for sure. And if any of our listeners have had that experience of a moment in which they feel possessed, they feel controlled by something internal, they don't know what it is, and they're compelled. Maybe it's criticizing your partner, maybe it's gambling, maybe it's overeating, whatever it is, it's exactly what you said. Where the ego is no longer in charge at that moment and agency is lost. So it's like a possession. It feels that way.
It takes a lot of discipline to do shadow work. How would you recommend building that discipline when it's not there initially? Because it might be hard for people to take those steps, even if it is in their awareness, even if they do notice and note things. I'm sure for some people it's hard to take that agency and control and discipline and not
I think that's a really good question. So for people who are doing the shadow work journal and expanding their insight into themselves and their self-knowledge, the next step is building that discipline. From my point of view, the first thing is finding a centering practice that really works for you. Yes. So if that's meditation or belly breathing or prayer or a movement practice, a martial art, or a walking meditation, whatever it is that works for you to come back to ground, right? Because when you're in that possession, you're not in your own center. Your psyche is colored in that moment by that shadow. And what you want to do is get back to neutral. The building in the discipline of a meditation practice helps to build in the discipline for shadow work. Some people may have that discipline for exercise or for dieting or at work. You may have the discipline at work, to sit at your desk. So this is another dimension of discipline which can really add to your internal state of mind, your peace, your quiet, your calm, by centering yourself and doing it a few minutes every day. For some people, it's when you wake up. For some people, it's at the end of the day or before bed. So find the best time to do that and begin to build that in to your routine in your own way, okay? And if you miss, it's not about being perfect. However, if you miss a lot, if you have the conscious intention to do this, but you sabotage it a lot, there's a shadow there. And so you want to explore what that is. What's the resistance? What's the procrastination, right?
Yeah.
The resistance to the discipline may be a shadow character. So it's an opportunity to kind of observe, what are you saying to yourself? Oh, I'm going to go meditate now, but instead you start eating dinner. So check in, see what's going on.
What shadow character would you assign to that, for example, like having a hard time building in discipline and creating positive habits and self-sabotage? I just want to give an example in real time. Like if someone's trying to assign a shadow character to these instances, how would we do that?
Well, when you begin this work, you start to recognize this pattern. You have a conscious intention, maybe it's to exercise or to meditate. And then this unconscious process comes up perpendicular to that direction, right? And blocks it. And so when you begin to recognize that pattern, it may be in a relationship pattern, it may be in a healthcare or self-care pattern, it may be in a work pattern with procrastination. So you start to recognize that that comes up, then you give it a name. So I used to call mine the resistor when I was working on this, that this part of me that just wanted to resist being told what to do. And a lot of people, especially in our culture with a parenting style, have a character that says inside, don't tell me what to do. I can see this in my grandkids now when they're little. Don't tell me what to do, right? So there's this resistance to authority from the outside. There's this resistance then to the internalized authority on the inside. So that shadow is experiencing this request for discipline as someone ordering them around. So who is that in you? Who is that shadow in you that says, I resist, don't tell me what to do?
Mhm.
Even though knowing it's not good for my well-being, it's not good for my health, it's not good for my job, it's not good for my relationship, but still hanging in there, don't tell me what to do.
Would you recommend going as far as assigning an actual name to that character? Like,
Yeah.
and then you have a name. Like, this is Lola. She is the drama queen, the drama character. I don't know, something like that. Just
Yeah, I love that. So in the way that I do shadow work, first you identify the three cues that the shadow is there: the inner dialogue, the feelings, and the bodily sensations. And when you discover that they're always the same with this shadow character, then you can give it a name. So if it's the drama queen, then give the drama queen an image, right? What does he or she look like? And with all of those cues, those 5 dimensions, it's much easier to catch it quickly when it comes up. So you then have 5 ways to go, up, drama queen's here. Do I want to do it differently today?
once you have this implemented, once you have this in your toolkit, in your mental toolkit, is the goal later then to dissolve this character and say goodbye and part ways? Or is this going to be always part of someone and it's just, a relationship that you have to understand?
I don't use the term integrating the shadow because for me, as a psychologist, that sounds like integrating it into the ego. And I don't think that's what happens. From my point of view, what happens is the more unconscious the shadow is, the more charge it has and the more control it has over us. So as it becomes more and more conscious, you started out by talking about shedding the light. So as we shed more light of awareness on the judge or the drama queen or the addict, it starts to lose charge. And the more we have a conscious relationship with it, it naturally recedes to a different place in your psyche where it doesn't have that much control over you.
So
It may pop up sometime, even years later. Like I used to have, when I was doing psychotherapy, I used to have clients who would say, okay, we don't fight about that anymore. And then the year later, they would say, oh my God, he's criticizing me again. I thought that would never happen again, right? So that critic was still in his psyche or his shadow. And for some reason, something triggered it again. That's kind of my point of view on it, that these are living, I want to say they're living parts of us. We can't kill them off. We're kind of built that way.
I mean, it's almost like memories. They're always somewhere in there, but some of
Mhm.
them have certain charges. Maybe it's in the memories of your emotional blueprint, and it's not like you can erase that altogether, but you can choose how much charge and power it's going to have in your life.
That's right. And it moves from center stage to backstage,
Yeah.
right? And, every once in a while it might emerge and move forward, but then you have these tools to deal with it. So it doesn't sabotage you so much. It doesn't feel like a possession anymore because you can get back to your center, you can quiet yourself down, and you can communicate differently. When we're in a shadow character, we usually communicate with blame
Right.
or criticism or shaming, right? It's about the other person. But
Mhm.
when we learn how to communicate differently with I statements and accountability, then we don't trigger the other person. And so their shadow character doesn't come out as often. So the whole dynamic changes. We can talk about that in relationships.
I want to move into addressing some common myths and misconceptions about shadow work. First one is shadow work is only for those with deep psychological issues. We've been talking about examples here and there, and I'm starting to see that the answer to this question formulating, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
In some ways, I would say it's risky for people with deep psychological issues, actually. But what do we mean by that? What do we mean by deep psychological issues? All of us have shadows. All of us have these parts that act out independently, where we go, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean that. Or, oh, that's not me, I'll never do that again, right? And we meet the shadow in a slip of the tongue or in a projection onto another person, which we could talk about, or in our dreams where, we kill someone in a dream. Well, we would never do that. We see these parts of ourselves that are forbidden or disowned, and we say, oh, that's not me. That's not who I am. Is that a deep psychological disturbance? No, it's not. It's normal neurosis. It's kind of in the range of, all of us. But in psychology, there are people with deeper disturbances, people who have had a psychotic episode in which they've really lost control of their psyches. Those folks are not ready to uncover unconscious material unless they have a really close guide, a psychiatrist or psychologist they're working with really closely. There are some people who have personality disorders, like we're seeing on the political stage right now, very obviously. Some people who are sociopathic, meaning they don't have a conscience, they don't have empathy, they have violent fantasies. It's risky for those people to face unconscious material because what is needed to do shadow work, Keila? What's needed is a consolidated ego and an ability to return to your center. So if you have a serious mood disorder, let's say you're depressed. So you're depressed, but you've also done a lot of therapy and you've learned a lot about yourself and you have some practices, then you can do this. You can do it slowly and gently and maybe with a guide and reading about it. So I always suggest to people that if they read the books, they'll get an intellectual framework first that won't be so threatening. They'll have the understanding and the insight before they start to do the emotional work. So that's also helpful. I think there's a misunderstanding that it's completely safe or that it's completely unsafe. And both of them are sort of untrue.
The second myth is it's a negative or evil practice. That's a common association with, I think, the term shadow. It's very dark, elusive, mysterious, negative, and I think that makes people afraid. There's a lot of fear around doing shadow work, and is this like good? Is it evil? Is it bad? Like, is it witchy? So I'd love to dig into that with you as well.
Well, my sense is that the language is everything. So if we impose a theological language on the shadow about good and evil, and what that means in our religious tradition that splits God and Satan, or God and the devil, that splits good and evil off from each other. And then we say, well, there's this good part of us and this evil part of us. Then this is very different from psychology and the understanding we have now around the psyche from the field of psychology. That insight is that we're all both good and bad. We have within us positive impulses to love and to serve and to care and to feel compassion. And we have in us impulses to be self-destructive or hurtful or critical of others. And I wouldn't use the word evil to refer to those parts. I would use harmful. We have harmful parts. And some of it is rooted in projection. We might see someone we believe is dangerous or against us or different, other. We might see them as other. And so for all these psychological reasons, we're projecting onto them, we're unconsciously attributing onto that person certain qualities that we don't want to look at in ourselves. And when we do that, then we might have destructive fantasies of killing them or hurting them or robbing them or something like that, right? So part of shadow work is to actually help us heal from the kinds of experiences that lead to our having those destructive parts and those projections. So if we become aware of the anger, the hostility, the enemy making inside of us, it's in every one of us. And we see it, being played out on the world stage now as these very, very right-wing leaders are coming into power all over the world. We see this playing out right now. We want to kind of examine ourselves and not contribute to the darkness. We want to, shed enough light on ourselves that we're not contributing to this collective shadow projection that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Shadow projection, racism, sexism, ageism, homophobia, it's all shadow projection. Now, is that evil? No, it's how we're built.
It's the nature of humanity.
It's part of being human. It's how we're built. But we also have the opportunity now to gain more consciousness and shed light on the darkness.
I think where people misinterpret doing shadow work, they think about those harmful aspects and they think shadow work is about bringing that into this, I don't know, about more like incorporating it or seeing more of it, or it's more about shedding light on those aspects and dissolving the power over us.
That's right.
Not about enhancing those harmful aspects. I think
No, clearly not. And as I said, the more light we shed on them, the more self-awareness we bring to them, the less power they have. The people who are really unconscious of those parts, like a sociopath, a murderer, the more unconscious they are, the more those parts control them.
This was a great conversation.
This is great. I really enjoyed it. I'm wondering if we can show my books.
Okay, so this is Meeting the Shadow on the Spiritual Path, The Dance of Darkness and Light in Our Search for Awakening. This is a great book if you want to tap into your spirituality and explore shadow work through the lens of spirituality.
Oh, that's great. Yes. How to live spirituality and shadow awareness at the same time.
For those people who are religious, shadow work can be part of your religious spiritual practice. It's actually a beautiful part to that practice. And then the inner work of age as well.
So the inner work of age extends shadow work into midlife and beyond. So if you've done the shadow work journal and you want to turn on your parents or even your grandparents to shadow work, this is the way to do it because the inner work of age will apply to them right where they are in the lifespan.
Yeah.
And
And then
then romancing the shadow is about is really focused on relationships and how couples and friends and colleagues can do shadow work to really enhance their communication and their intimacy. And we'll talk about that more.
awesome. Thank you so much for the time.